Okay, so I want to introduce Johanna. So when Mickey and I were, so I was just we were just chatting about books before we started this, and when Mickey and I were writing Managing the Unmanageable, which took us 8 years, part of the reason we were writing it was we looked around for other books on managing software developers, on managing software development, and for managers of software developers. And we found something like 7 or 8 books in the history of computing. There were very, very few. And when our book came out when our first edition of our book came out in 2012, so this is the second edition, when the first edition came out, I reached out to the authors of those other 7 or 8 books. And Johanna Rothman was one of those authors, and she had written a book with Esther Derby called Behind Closed Doors. That was literally one of the first 7 or 8 books on managing software developers in the history of software development. She's an incredibly prolific author in the areas of managing and of agile and of software development culture. She wrote, we were just talking about, she wrote Hiring Geeks That Fit. She has written a bunch of books on agile. She has been I was hosting the Managing Software Development in Software Teams in Seattle meetup, and we had Johanna as a speaker there. We've had her as a speaker here, and today she's going to talk about feedback loops as an important and key and critical element of software development. So Johanna, off to you.
Well, thank you very much. I am sharing my screen now, and I'm making sure to pop out the chat so I can see everything. This is that. Now, if you see me look off to my left, that means I'm looking at your smiling faces, and I'm looking at the chat. So let me do one more thing. Make sure I can see all your smiling faces. Okay. Oh, let me start off. Okay, so this is about seeing your feedback loops, because feedback loops are actually the way you can incorporate agility into your team, your product development, your organization, everything about how you work. And when I ask people, are you using an agile approach? Everyone's hand goes up. Yes, we're using an agile approach. And then when I ask them, how well is it working for you? They say, well, we have a lot of long and extensive backlogs and roadmaps. We have years of backlogs, years of roadmaps. We know what we're supposed to do forever and ever. And the team often feels as if it's more of a feature factory rather than a way to implement a product strategy to then check against the organizational strategy, right? I don't see a lot of experimentation because of all these long and extensive backlogs and roadmaps. And yet I see a lot of late changes, right? The teams are almost dying under the weight of all of these late changes because they did all this planning up front and they have all these plans for these backlogs and roadmaps. And then they realize later that they need to change everything. And the worst part is the agile promise was we would have joy in our work. We would have easier work. Instead, we have a grind of work, which makes everybody kind of grumpy. So that's why we have the grumpy coffee cup. So what I often see is that we have agile theater, which is in reality fake agility. And so while I see a lot of fake agility, I'm not going to blame anybody for having fake agility because the managers are using tools which are not helpful, and they want the teams to use tools that are not helpful. And what we see interactions and individuals and interactions over tools and whatever. Yeah. So that was all in the manifesto. So we still have the problem of teams not being able to deliver fast enough, and that managers want more done now. And they think that by planning all of this work, and inadvertently increasing all the WIP, work in progress, that they can get more done faster. They cannot. And the reason they cannot is because we have a root cause of all of this, which is the culture. A lot of managers believe in resource efficiency. That's where the work assignment comes in. The first expert does their part of the work. That expert then hands off the work to the next person, right? And that expert does their part of the work. Then there's a handoff to the next expert, et cetera, et cetera. You finally get the finished work. And the problem with that is that every single handoff is a delay. And that's a resource efficiency is an anti-agility kind of a culture. Instead, we need flow efficiency where people work as collaborative teams. Now, the interesting thing about flow efficiency is that means that managers create the environment for everyone to succeed as a part of the team. In resource efficiency, managers think they can identify who did what and when and reward that. So notice the rewards here are very, very different. In flow efficiency, the team, or maybe a sub-team, does the work in a collaborative fashion. Now, I really happen to like swarming or mobbing. I don't care if you have pairing, right? But some way to collaborate around a limited amount of WIP, the work in progress. And the way our managers reward individuals will either reinforce flow efficiency thinking or resource efficiency thinking. If you have rewards rewarding individuals, it's very, very difficult to get to any kind of a successful agile culture. And without that, you're not going to have successful agile teams. Now, I will be the first one to say a successful agile team is not the goal. The goal is successful products that satisfy our customers in a reasonable amount of time. And often that requires speed. The fastest way to get those satisfactory products is with more flow efficiency. So agility drives our need for faster delivery. And the way we get that is with flow efficiency thinking. Okay. So you have options whether or not your managers really believe in resource efficiency or flow efficiency. And as long as you are identifying your risks, now you can incorporate agility at many, many levels. So let me first talk about what I mean by risks. There are three major kinds of risks in product development. There are the project risks, then the product risks, and then finally the portfolio organizational risks. Now, some of you, how many of you here really believe in product-focused organizations? I will have a show of hands. I like product-focused organizations, and let me just suggest to you that if you have a project as container that allows you to think about product-focused organizations using project risks, because the product has different kinds of risks over its lifetime, right? When you have an early lifetime, early in the product life cycle, you have different risks than late in the product life cycle, right? So I'm using project as container to identify these project risks. So when I think about projects as container, I have this notion of a project pyramid that says only one aspect can drive your project. You might have two constraints but not more than 2, and everything else is a float that allows you to change your trade-offs. Now, let me first talk about what I mean by all of this. I'm sure all of you have heard the Project Management Institute's quality, scope, and time, or quality, scope, and defect. No, that's, yeah, defects is quality. Feature, cost to release, and defects, right? Everything is, there's more than 3, however you look at that 3-legged stool. So I think that this project pyramid explains what's really going on. Inside the team's control, there's the amount of work they can do. Those are all the feature sets. With a specific amount of quality, that's low defects, and then the possible time to release. This leads us to the thinking that we cannot fit a 10-pound bag of features into a 5-pound project scope, right? It's just, you cannot do twice the work in half the time. That never works. I don't care who your name is. That is a fallacy and can never work. However, if you have a reasonable work environment, you might be able to do a little bit more. If you're not worried about the cost to release, you might be able to do a little bit more because you can make certain trade-offs. And if you have people with their capabilities, and remember, collaboration raises everybody's capabilities up, then it's possible for you to do a little bit more. But if you focus on cost, you will only be able to do less. If you focus on time, you will only be able to do less. Well, you have to manage the scope. So the team has total control over the inside of the pyramid. Management sets the capabilities and the work environment and the cost to release. And if management does not actually set those, then the team can actually say, management, what is most important to you? If it's 3 weeks before the end of the project and we don't quite have all the features and we haven't finished fixing all the defects, what do you want to do? Do you want to release it anyway? That's the date, that's the time to release. If you want to finish all those features, that's the feature set, right? That's driving the project. And if quality is the most important thing, then quality is driving your project. So that, I have many ways of explaining how this goes in my various books. So there are ways to figure this out. And often it's that one simple conversation where we ask management, what is the most important thing to you? Now, management might actually say the cost is the most important thing. In that case, you have to be able to trade off time and feature set and possibly quality, right? That's why it's so important to ask this question in advance, because that's a project as container risk. Then there are product risks. Very few projects are totally deterministic. Maybe a port from one hardware platform to another might have very little discovery required. However, most of us live in this messy middle, right? There are some, if you're at the very start of a product and you're not really sure who the ideal customers are and the problems you want to solve, that's recursive discovery. You need an agile approach for that. But everything else, most of us are in the messy middle where we need some innovation, we need some discovery, we need some delivery, and how much we iterate and how much we increment is really up to the project team, right? The team can decide that for themselves. Because if you are most of the time, well, what's that that quote, something like 80% of all projects never let me do this the right way. We have the 80-20 rule applied to products. Something like 80% of the customers use 20% of all of the features. I certainly do this with Microsoft Word. I would love WordLight. I don't want any more I don't want anything more in Word. I definitely don't want AI. I only want the things I really desperately need. And almost all products are just like that. So something like 20% of your customers use another 20% of your product. But most of your customers don't use most of your product. And that means that early in the product life cycle, we need to figure out where most of our customers are. And late in the product life cycle, our customers don't want anything new. So when we are experimenting with our product and learning who our customers are, that's when very few ideas survive customer contact. And we need all of this discovery. But most of the time, we can figure out how to innovate regardless of the life cycle we have, as long as our feedback loops are fast enough. So then there are the portfolio risks. If your organization needs to change the project portfolio more frequently, you need more deliveries from the team, right? Because having a lot of WIP, work in progress, makes it impossible for management to decide on what to do next for the project portfolio. And if you have a lot of innovation where you're really trying to figure out where your product is in terms of its customers, then you don't have enough stability for a long decision cycle. You need shorter decision cycles and more frequent delivery. So, and the more risk you have for everything, project, product, and portfolio, the more you need to reduce the feedback loop duration. So I would like to see what you say in your organization, and I will not call on anybody by their name. So I think you can say a number for your team's collaboration for enabling agility. A 1 is everyone always works alone. A 5 is the team always collaborates on everything. A 3 is we collaborate on urgent issues. And then 2 and 4 are sometimes people work alone, well, work together, and sometimes people work alone. So I see 1, where everyone works alone. That's resource efficiency thinking. I see some 3s where we collaborate on urgent issues. That's good. It's not a lot of collaboration for agility. I'm hoping somebody else will actually add what they think, because I don't have too many data points here. All right, so I will continue. Oh, I see a 4. Once you move to sometimes people work alone, right? That means more of the time you're working as a collaborative team. That really enables a lot more agility than the other tendencies here. Okay. So let me talk about life cycles before we continue. A lot of you have heard about the dreaded waterfall or stage gate or phases. These are all serial life cycles, and they have common characteristics where they do a lot of planning up front, right? With requirements, analysis, design, we finally get to code. To be honest, code here in a serial life cycle, as long as integration and test is afterwards, is still planning. Because you're planning that you can integrate, you're planning that you can test. And everything they have in common is this idea that it becomes a simple matter of execution. I have yet to see any project that succeeds with a simple matter of execution. And the reason is that a lot of these so-called agile teams are either in requirements hell or freezes, which are really slush. So in this particular team, they're in requirements hell. They have a long backlog, an even longer roadmap. They have 0 experiments. So they continually gather requirements in the form of adding to the backlog, adding to the roadmap. They start doing analysis, design, and coding, and they still have more requirements here, right? So all of these, anytime you are still gathering requirements before you get to testing, you are in a serial life cycle, right? So anytime any of you who are doing water scrum fall, right, where you're supposed to gather all the requirements, then you move into 2-week time boxes where you might actually finish something inside of a sprint, and then you do testing at the end. You are in some kind of a serial approach. I still see many organizations want freezes, right? They actually have a phase where they say design freeze or requirements freeze or architecture freeze or code freeze. First of all, freezes were always slush. I never, I've been doing projects since the 1970s. I have never seen a freeze be anything other than slush. We always had a feedback loop. And the problem with all of these kinds of lots of planning up front and little testing until the end is that we have unplanned feedback loops. As soon as you get to design, you realize, oh, we have more requirements. As soon as you get to code, you realize, oh, we need more analysis or more design. As soon as you get to integration, you realize, oh my goodness, we're back in requirements, we're back in analysis, we're back in design, we're back in code. As long as if you cannot show finished work, you are in some kind of a serial life cycle. Now, is it a very bad serial life cycle? I don't know. If it fits your needs, then it's okay. But most of the time, I see it does not fit our needs, right? When I wrote Create Your Successful Agile Project, I said one of the big traps for supposedly agile teams is that they have a 2-week sprint of development and then a 2-week sprint of testing. I see it even worse now. A 2-week sprint of requirements, 2-week sprint of analysis, 2-week sprint of design, 2-week sprint of code, 2-week sprint of testing, which incorporates integration. That's 5 phases. That's an entire quarter, right? It's only supposed to be 10 weeks, but it takes the other 2 weeks to actually finish anything. And the feedback loops are very, very long. So I hope none of you are in any of that kind of serial life cycle hell, but I suspect some of you are. Let me contrast that with the iterative life cycles. NetBeam's spiral model and evolutionary prototyping were the first 2 examples of the iterative life cycle. And too often, safe approaches are often an iterative life cycle because they don't finish anything to until at least the first quarter, often the second. So it's fine if you have prototypes. That's really good. You can get feedback from those prototypes. However, the more you are much more likely to have what I call the project kiss of death, where you get to the last prototype. It's always the last prototype, right? And then you realize something changed everything about your assumptions, and you have nothing to ship. So the problem with the iterative only life cycles, yes, the prototypes and refining the prototypes are great, but you have nothing to ship until the very, very end. That's a very risky approach to product development. Now, if you're having internal feedback all along the way, maybe this is okay, right? I once did a new version of the operating system for a new kind of hardware. We could not just port the operating system. We had to change because of the underlying hardware. So we brought our very important and very special customers inside the building. We made them sign all these non-disclosures, all that really wonderful stuff. And we had them come in once every couple of weeks to see our prototypes. And we said, the old operating system works this way. The new operating system works this way, right? This other way. We think this is better. What do you think? And we got feedback from them then. And then we were inside of a quarter, we were able to actually ship something to our very important customers who we gave this new hardware to, because we were so very concerned that we would not have enough feedback about them. So internal feedback is good. External feedback is even better. External feedback at their site is even the best. I'm going to take a sip of water. Now, there are two famous incremental life cycles. Design to Schedule focuses on release candidates. Now, because we did this back in the 80s and the 90s, we used priority ranking, not necessarily the most valuable, often the most risky. Yeah, fine. We were not thinking about value then. But this is all for feature sets. So and even the worst part was we did an entire feature set at a time, even knowing that our customers were probably not going to use the entire feature set. Fine, we have learned from them. Stage delivery assumes that the team will release. So as soon as you have done something useful, the team releases it. So Design to Schedule is all about release candidates, and stage delivery is all about releasing as you go. Now, when I thought I had created this. No, stage delivery has been around since at least the 60s or the 70s, or when I started to use it, right? This is nothing new. I don't actually know the origin of stage delivery, but it's been around for a very long time. Now, notice these are all full feature sets, right? So the agile approaches give us permission to actually do partial feature sets, but the incremental life cycles were all about releasing. And that means that if you only have release candidates, you might have the kiss of death, but chances are very good you have a checkpoint here, and you can release wherever you got to there and say, we declare victory, and we will figure out what to do about this big problem in our next project, right? So project as container really does work. Now, with stage delivery, you always release what you have. This looks a lot like an agile approach, except as I said, these are full feature sets, and they're not all the same size. Time can be longer or shorter depending on the size of the feature set. Now, one of the things I really like to do is combining approaches. So if you cannot be fully agile, whatever that means, right? If your management really loves resource efficiency thinking, then you can still do a date-driven approach. So you do an initial pass at requirements. I often did, I limited the requirements people to 2 weeks. I got to the point where later on, before I actually started to use an agile approach, I said, you got 3 days. If you cannot figure out the first most important requirements in 3 days, you don't know what we need to do. So don't tell me anything about starting this project or program. Just finish, do 3 days worth of requirements. Now we can prototype what we do know, we can get feedback on and select a candidate architecture. That allows us to fully implement 3 features, integrating as we go. We get feedback on that with the demo, and then we can say, okay, are we okay now? Chances are good we are. We implement more features, always with releasing, and then we're okay, right? We have a way to get to a successful product. Now, sometimes we need a feature-driven approach. That means we need an iterative first approach and then decide what to release. One of my clients back in the middle O's said, we do 6-week time boxes, and they did evolutionary prototyping, really where they would refine the prototypes continually and demo at least once a week, right? That allowed them to say, what is our decision point? Do we go on to more evolutionary prototyping, or do we move directly to a 6-week time box of delivery? And that allowed them to really reduce all of the product risks, but only with internal feedback. So that was actually very useful for them. So you can combine approaches, and they're still not an agile approach. When I talk about an agile approach, this is what I mean. A collaborative cross-functional team takes a limited amount of WIP, that work in progress, that's ranked. It's a ranked backlog, not high, medium, and low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And then on a regular basis, produces releasable product. At some point, the team does a demo and a retrospective and goes and gets back more information. If you're using Scrum, this responsible person is a product owner. A lot of people use the idea of a product owner for any agile approach they have. But the key is they release often for feedback. They learn from what they did, that double loop learning. And I have started to call this agility, not agile. First of all, agile is an adjective. So I want to increase our agility, not label our approach as an agile approach, right? So I don't care what you call it, as long as we have more agility for more learning and more of that double loop learning, so we can satisfy our customers. Now, this is why I keep saying agile approaches are cultural change. And with apologies to all my agile friends who say they have a mindset, an agile mindset, or they do stand-ups. So Ron has known me for years. For years, I have been trying to lose weight. I had to change my culture of what I ate. I had a mindset of losing weight. I had specific practices. I weighed myself. I did all these other wonderful things, but I had to change my culture around food to be able to lose weight, right? So mindset is not enough. Specific practices are not enough. Frameworks are not enough, because an agile approach should change as the product changes, as the organization needs a different outcome. You can certainly imagine there are times when a 2-week time box will absolutely work for you. And you can also imagine a time where you want to release something every single day, or multiple times a day, or multiple times a week, because your customers want all those changes. That's a cultural change to a flow efficiency thinking model of how to work, not a resource efficiency thinking model of how to work. Now, life cycles are specific approaches, and they tend not to change. A team can use a different life cycle or a different agile approach, but let's not confuse an agile approach with a life cycle. Now, one thing I really want to focus on is agile teams have to work through the architecture to deliver. If agile teams do not work through the architecture, they're probably component teams. They're probably not cross-functional. And component teams challenge agility in every way, because it's all focused on resource efficiency, right? Resource efficiency as a UI team, as a middleware team, as a back-end team, as a test team. We need cross-functional teams. However, if you have component teams, if you check in something every single day, you can mimic more agility. You can mimic a more agile approach. So there are 2 major agile approaches where we have iterations, which are time boxes. by default, when the iteration is over, then when the time box is up, let me. I'm get so excited about this. Let me try this again. By definition, when the time box is up, the iteration and it's over, pencils down, right? The shorter the iteration, the faster everyone can learn. And that means that if you try and push too much work into a time box, you will always have this problem of rolling over work, right? That increases your WIP. In contrast, a Kanban system does not need time boxes. The team limits its WIP by design. I happen to like to right size the work so the team delivers on a cadence. One of my clients has this very interesting Kanban system. They always plan a little bit on Mondays, right? Mondays at just before their lunch, they spend half an hour planning the next one or two stories they will do. They work on those. If they are done before Wednesday at noon, that's great. They always do a demo Wednesday at noon. They record it so anybody can watch it. They do a little retrospective to make sure they're learning from their work. If they are done with everything that they planned, they now do a little bit more planning. Chances are good they haven't quite finished everything they planned, so they plan again on Thursday. They always do a retrospective on Fridays. I think Fridays is a terrible day for a retrospective, but every time I tell them this, they say, we like Fridays. Okay, fine. I know people who like to take early weekends. I'm in the Boston area, and I think everybody in Boston escapes to the Cape on Fridays in the summer. So I would not do a retrospective on Fridays. They didn't ask me. So they have a very interesting Kanban approach. They do almost all of their planning just in time. So, and that works for them. I really like just-in-time planning. I do not like a lot of long-term planning. Now, if you cannot really use an agile approach, then based on your project risk and based on your product risk, choose an approach that works for you. More of us need incremental or agile approaches where we commit to our teams and to ourselves that we will deliver something on a regular basis, right? And if you know what you have to do, say, as an example, maybe you have a really big bad bug, right? You have to fix this defect. You know that there are limited architectural or design changes, that all of the risks are in the actual implementation and how this defect has its fingers in the entire code base. So you're not planning on learning a lot. You can use a serial approach then, but I would probably use more of an incremental approach just to make sure we are making progress. And anytime you have a longer time frame than 2 or 3 weeks, I would not use a serial approach at all. I would make sure we have visual progress, at least an iterative approach to see where we are with prototypes, or I prefer an incremental approach where we always deliver something reasonably quickly. So the longer the time frame you want to plan for, the more adaptability you actually need. And this, so think about if I was going to drive out to California where some of you are located. So Rob, you even say you're in San Francisco. I love San Francisco, especially in March, because it's here we still have the promise of snow, and you are very into spring right now. So if I was going to drive, I would say, yeah, my goal is San Francisco. But as I drive across the country, I have several ways I could go. I could take the northern route, not in the winter. I could take the southern route, possibly. possibly because it's March. I might be able to take a middle route, which is a very interesting approach. I think I would have to go over the Continental Divide, and that's still winter in March. I would not do that. So my strategy has not changed. Drive from Boston to San Francisco and then have a beer or a coffee or something with Rob. and then but my backlog and my literal roadmap has to change. So the longer we have to plan for, the more we have to plan for change. And that means we need more increments of delivery and more agility in everything that we do. So I'm going to ask now about WIP limits. In the chat, please use a number for this answer. One is we never limit WIP. WIP is work in progress. 5 is we always limit WIP. We finish what we start before taking on new work. 3 is we try, but the urgent work interrupts us. So let me see what you say. I see a 4, a 3, 2.5, 4, 4. Yeah. Yeah, shortcuts and the urgent are very, very challenging. Yeah. So I would say if you have to take on production support, chances are very good you're using an iteration-based approach, and worse, a Scrum board, and you're using push planning to try and push everything into that board. I would say plan a whole lot less, use cycle time for your stories, or count the number of stories you can finish, and only choose the WIP that corresponds to that number of stories, right? So the more you can limit your WIP, the more likely you are to finish everything. Because every time you think about how do I increase agility, first there's limiting WIP. And then secondly, collaborating on fewer things. Because as long as you have one team and not multitasked individuals, that team can say, what's the most important thing we need to do now? The nice thing about having one team is that the more you collaborate, the fewer stand-ups you need. I really like, let me say it this way. I think stand-ups there is a certain place in hell for stand-ups. I would rather not do any stand-up at all. And if the team collaborates on everything, you never have to do a stand-up. And even if you do have a stand-up, now you can use a board to walk the board where you say, what do we as a team need to do to move this item to done? How would we have to work? And that manages to watch the work, not the people. I really like value stream mapping to see whether you are cooperating or collaborating. I have links to all of these on the next slide. And especially if you are not sure how your team works now, you can do an agile Hudson-based start to figure out what is our value stream map. Do we always depend on one tester who is far away from us? Do we need to change that? How could we change that? Right? If you don't know the impediments to your teaming ability, you don't know what you could change. I've talked about
Johanna, what's
yes.
what's a Hudson-based start?
Okay, so I have a link to that later, but Hudson-based start says take one item as a team, figure out what you have to do to finish that one item. Only work on that one item. Do we have a lot of developers who can help with review? Do we have a lot of testers who can be developing tests as the team proceeds? What do we need to do to experiment to figure out how to do one thing and get it to completion? And I have a link for that later. Okay, so let me first talk about the flow metrics. Anyone who is still using velocity is totally meaningless. I am a very boring person. I have vertigo. I think my rollator is outside the screen, but I take outside of my camera view. But I take the same walk several times every day. I often walk by time, which means in the winter when I walk outside, I walk fewer steps, right? That's my velocity because I walk fewer steps. So there might be ice on the ground, there might be snow, there might be rain. I really don't like walking in the winter outside. I much prefer walking inside. Now, that means that my velocity is relatively similar unless the doorbell rings or unless so we have something if I have turned on the oven and I need to turn on a timer partway through my walk. So velocity, even though I'm doing exactly the same walk with exactly the same complexity, velocity is still meaningless. So what does work is cycle time. On average, how long does it take me to walk my 500 steps or my 1500 steps or my 2000 steps? On average. Now, I can talk about average means and medians, but cycle time for teams, because we're not doing anything as simple as walking, we measure cycle time instead. So if you I suspect all of you are either in town. Rob, I'm not sure if you live in the middle of San Francisco or if you live where?
In the city, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So if you had to get to San Jose, you actually and you did this during rush hour, you might actually have a reverse commute. Maybe. I'm not sure anymore.
Changes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's imagine it takes you on average 45 minutes to get from in the middle of San Francisco to San Jose. It's a rough cycle time. But you have a client in San Jose. So instead of you're not going to allow just 45 minutes, sometimes it takes you an hour because traffic in the Bay Area. Sometimes it even takes you an hour and a half. And so if you are like me, and I would use Boston because I'm literally 6 miles from the center of Boston, but it takes forever to get there, right? 45 minutes. So you have more miles, same time. Because that you have complexity that is unclear and changes from day to day. This is exactly like our stories in software development. So I really liked to measure cycle time. And I also want to see how old is this stuff? Because the older the work is, the less useful it might be. WIP is work in progress. Throughput is how many things, how fast can you release something. So there's Little Saw, which says work in progress is a function of cycle time, how long it takes us to get stuff done, and how much stuff we get done. No one can outsmart Little Saw. It really is, it's true. So that's why flow metrics are the meaningful metrics for more agility. Now, there's a bunch of culture and project tips you can use too. How can you learn faster? I really like internal feedback in the form of demos, customer feedback as often as possible, retrospectives as often as possible, really. And I really like to plan for shorter projects. That way I can reduce all the unplanned feedback loops. How often can you demo and deliver, right? If you are not delivering and demoing at least once a month, move to once a month, then once a week, then once a day, then multiple times a day. Now you will probably have to arrange your infrastructure to be able to deal with this. Several of my clients still have deployment teams. So it almost does not matter how often the team can do anything because they always have to wait for a deployment team. So I see a raised hand. What is the question?
Hey, John.
Yes.
Sorry, I have a question to the previous slide, but I can ask you at the end. I don't want to interrupt you in the middle. Regarding the velocity and cycle time. So we calculate velocity for average. Velocity is an average for 3 sprints, right? So
No,
are
no,
you referring to that or a different
no,
thing?
no.
Okay.
Velocity is a per story measure. If you are trying to calculate velocity, you are even more stuck. Velocity assumes all of your stories are roughly the same size. Now you can right size your stories. That would totally work. But I will find something when I'm done, let me find something about velocity. I have something about magical thinking and velocity. Velocity, if you are trying to use velocity as your cycle time, right? An average velocity, you are doomed to fail. It's not possible because every story has a different complexity. And if people work alone on their stories, right? If you work with everybody, maybe you can use velocity like that, but no, that's not how velocity works.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, John.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because I'm almost done. So what I really want to get across is we need a lot less planning and a lot more delivering to get real agility. Because it's not agile that really matters. It's really how fast can we satisfy the customer with working product which obtains revenue for us. And that agility will help us bring joy and ease to our work. So I've written a bunch of books. I Create Your Successful Agile Project does a whole bunch of work on why velocity is not very useful. I have all these ideas here, and I will stop here and stop the share so I can find my my magical thinking post. All right, now. Okay. Here is why velocity does not work and why cycle time does work. And I am happy if you email me later to ask me more questions about this, because or maybe I could do an Ask Me Anything at some point with you folks, because I think you are not alone. A lot of people use velocity, which is just a useless measure. Okay, other questions?
I do have a couple of questions. Yeah. First, thank you for the presentation. Really have a lot of learning today. And by the way, I'm new to the to the group, and I just wanted to. I think I follow Ron on LinkedIn and just saw this meeting, but maybe on the question. And also, I'm not from the US. I'm living in Estonia right now. I'm originally from the Philippines. But yeah, so a couple of questions from me. I hope that's fine. So there was a slide about Kanban system, and you mentioned there that it doesn't need time boxes, and it limits by work in progress by design. So I rarely use Kanban, but right now within our team, and by the way, I'm engineering manager for a product team. But what we currently have is that we're using Kanban system, and we try to do work in progress limits, but it is like also my suggestions to my team that even though we're working alone, so that we can also increase our efficiency or our cycle time. We measure cycle time, by the way.
Okay, good.
That we also time box, mainly because this is relevant to my next question, but mainly because our team currently, our organization has just started its cultural change from feature teams, project teams to product teams. But the main thing is that within our team, we also have a lot of knowledge gaps within our product domain. So now that's why I'm kind of like combining this work in progress and then time boxing within, but we usually do individual tasks right now, which I always tell my team to let's collaborate more. But hopefully that changes. But yeah, on the Kanban system, how do you kind of right size and is it always better to right size than time box?
I prefer right sizing. If I have to choose one of them, I prefer right sizing because I find that it's let me find. I thought I had.
Can we define right sizing?
I have a post about it. I probably have several posts about it. Okay. Here is at least one. Right sizing is when you look at the work and say, in general, will this work? Do you think this work will fit in our regular cycle time, right? If we normally do 2 or 3 stories a week, that means we have a cycle time of about 2 to 3 days per story, right? Sometimes 2, sometimes 3, maybe as low as 1. And but we normally think we can do 2 stories a week. Does this story look like that same size as our normal 2-day stories, right? That's what I mean by right sizing. And then the next question I always have is, does a team collaborate on all of those stories so that you limit all the width, so that if you have a 5-person team, then I say never have more than 2 things open anywhere on your board. If you have an 8-person team, maybe you can have up to 3 items open on your board. Now, what's interesting here is that everyone says, well, remember Fred Brooks, and adding more people to a late project makes it later. And that's true if everybody works alone. However, Fred Brooks only thought men worked on software projects, and Fred Brooks never understood the idea of WIP. So, poor Fred, right? He was a man of his time, and his time is now long gone. So I think it's really important to say, if we collaborate, can we have more people supporting ourselves, right? I'm not sure if I have the swarming here. Here's the right sizing one. There's that, and let me find. Oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff there. I think I had let me find the swarming. So the good news is I've written a lot. The bad news is I've written a lot. If you are unsure what I mean by swarming and mobbing, swarming is where the team has a WIP of 1 and everybody collaborates on that one thing to support everybody moving that one thing to done. Mobbing is where everybody not only has a WIP of 1, but also literally collaborates in real time with that one document is under everybody's review. There's a way, Woody Zuell is now calling this software teaming fine. I really liked mobbing. I don't think it's ensemble programming. I think it's literally mobbing, but that's fine.
Nice. Thank you so much, Johanna.
You're
Maybe
welcome.
someone else has questions, so I can ask again maybe later if someone else has question first.
Other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
You mentioned that planning. I forgot exactly how your statement was, but that more, I guess, development and less planning helps the team to be more agile. Part of the problem is that a lot of times team members don't understand the domain well enough to understand what it is that they're actually supposed to be developing, how different parts of the systems are supposed to interoperate in order to work correctly. So a lot of time is then spent adding that functionality in afterwards or correcting for errors in their understanding of the problem. Or there was a failure to prototype it well enough for the end user to get feedback on what will work for them or not. I have a background in making animated cartoons, and there's a lot of upfront work that's done in understanding what it is they're going to be drawing, what the characters are going to look like, recording the audio, etc., before the drawings are even undertaken. So it all depends on how well the area is understood for the planning process. It's the same thing with manufacturing. They don't just go out when they're going to come out with a new model. They just don't go on the factory floor and figure out what they're going to build. They spend years designing the look and the components, etc. So can you speak on that? What you consider to be the planning that's non-essential to the design aspect?
So if you have a product that requires a lot of prototyping to really understand the domain and the problem, then incorporate that into your planning and make sure the entire team is involved with that planning. Well, I might prefer a one-day spike. You might have to have a whole week spike. The more the entire team understands the planning, right, the more the entire team can deliver that product. So, and if people, let's imagine you, you might have a client, you might be like a client of mine. For a long time, they only hired very, very senior engineers. So people who were in their 40s and 50s. And then all those people retired almost all within the same 2 or 3 years. And they had to hire all new people, many of which were much, much younger and had no idea how the product worked in the solution space. So yes, new people to the product, new people to the domain, new people to everything. And those people took a lot longer to actually change anything about the product than literally the older people who had been there. So if you are in that position, there's something you can do, which is to make sure nobody ever works alone, regardless of where they are in relative to their retirement plans, and that the entire team collaborates as much as possible on one thing at a time. Now, that one thing might have to be a feature set instead of one story inside of a feature set. I prefer a story by story collaboration for the entire team, because that way everybody learns and grows their learning at roughly the same rate. But maybe you feel you have to do a couple of stories at a time. I find that this is the more the team can collaborate on one thing at a time, the faster the entire team learns. And what you are talking about is the speed of team learning. I think you are muted right now.
Yeah, I was, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I had switched microphones. Yes, in team or in-house training for the team members, I think is pretty important. That's another thing I learned from the animation in the Disney studio. It's the in-house training. It was critical to their success, and
Yeah.
businesses, if they want to succeed, are doing it. Thank you for pointing that out. I had not considered the likelihood of senior engineers dropping out, retiring, or leaving at that. You just helped me avoid a big problem I was thinking of coming to.
Oh, good.
Thank you very much.
Yay. Yay.
All right, any last questions? We need to be wrapping up.
One last from me, if no one else has any question.
Go for it, Bob.
Yeah, so there was a suggestion about like what kind of like method or life cycle approach you want to do when you don't need to learn. But what would be your suggestion, for example, if you have a lot of unknown unknowns, even though you've done your planning, your discovery up front, but you know that there's still a lot of unknown unknowns. And for example, it's just a really, really new thing that you're trying to do. So what's your suggestion when you're expecting a lot of learning?
The more learning I expect, the more I want to increment deliveries, right? Iterate over the features and deliver something really small as often as possible, multiple times a day, if possible, right? And that all depends on the size of your team, right? You're a manager. I don't know if you have a 9-person team, a 35-person team, a 3,000-person team. I don't know where you are. So
I have a 20 like 16 engineers and 4 product owners in the team.
okay.
So.
All right.
Yeah.
So you have enough to be able to do a bunch of frequent deliveries that are very, very small. I put my email in the chat. I am happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. I'm happy if you email me. I will post these slides and send them to Ron at some point today, tomorrow. I got a bunch of stuff still to do today.
All right, so thank you very much, Johanna, for presenting this topic to all of us. And I want to note that we have coming up on April 16th a former totally focused on Agilist who has transformed her career to AI and is going to talk about. So there's a lot of Agilists who are out of work right now. And she's going to talk about the opportunities in AI and Agile careers and AI careers and the future. And then we've got change management coming up on May 1st. So we've got, if you go look at the enterprise Agile space coming up, I think we've got four topics queued over the next 3 or 4 or 5 months. So take a look, join us again. Thank you again, Johanna. Tons of appreciation for your sharing with us. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, I echo Ron, and this is fantastic session. We need like Johanna at my house to clarify whatever I wanted to do. So the knowledge that you have and the information that you shared is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, for being here, and I'm delighted. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Johanna. Thanks so much.
Yep.